guys, welcome back to Modern Dentures. This is the full lower model that we cast from there. I haven't bothered doing a video of that because it's exactly the same as casting up the alginate that we did in the last video. Done it in a base again as before. Left a little bit too much in this lingual area of the lower, so we're going to have to trim a lot of that out. That's not a big deal. I did break off these back bits a little bit because I don't need those, as long as you've got like the second third of the retromolar pads, but quite often I reduce that down to about half anyway. What I'm going to do now is just prep this model ready for articulation. If you're going to articulate models, you do need to trim these models first. You can't just do like what we did when we was working on the preliminary model, which we was using just to make a bite block and special tray. That model, yeah, it doesn't really matter too much if it's big and bulky, but when we're doing a try-in, we don't want the big and bulky model. So what we're going to do is use a model trimmer today just to trim them down and get them to a nice sort of shape and size. So the first thing we do is we trim the back so that it's flush, not necessarily level, but just so that it's roughly where we want the back of the model to finish. That's the first stage. Then we tip it up and then we get it level. So we want the heights of the ridge the same all the way around and get it as level as possible. When we cast up the model, it wasn't quite level, so you can see this was the original base, but I'm cutting it at a completely different angle because the tray wasn't level. And it's very difficult to get the tray level because it's obviously everything's covered in plaster and you can't see it. But now at this stage, when you can see it, this is where we're trying to make sure that we get the right level. If we try and articulate it when it's all skew width, it makes it very difficult to line it up again when the bite blocks are on there to get everything level. So that's why we're trying to get this one and the top one relatively parallel to make articulation easier. And if you get the articulation right, it's easier to set the teeth up on it as well. The other thing I will mention, when you're model trimming, you don't just hold it like that. You have to keep moving it, otherwise it won't cut as well. It'll get all gunked up in the blade if you're just holding it there. You know, the water won't get to it. So if you're moving it like that, you'll get more water flow in there and it'll cut through it quicker. So I've cut it down, I don't know if you can see on the model, but really thin, almost perforated it here. However, when I make the denture, it's not going to go down that far anyway, so it doesn't matter if we do go through a little bit. We do have to be careful that we don't take too much off of the front, but more so these areas here, because it's really easy to over trim those areas, and that's usually because when they're cast up, they're cast up a bit short in those areas. And then, as you see, I just smoothed off these edges just to make it nice and clean. Got it relatively flat. Couldn't get it completely flat here. There's still a little bit, but again, that doesn't matter. If I'd gone any more, I would have perforated through, which I didn't want because that just makes it more difficult when we're articulating, as the plaster will come up through and then might make a mess. Okay, so that's how I trim it. Try and keep it fairly symmetrical. And then if we was to put the bite block on there, as you can see, it's not going down because we got too much in here. Also, this bite block wasn't made on this model, so there are things that we need to do to make sure that this is fitting down onto this. And over the years I've seen this a lot where the bite block doesn't fit the secondary model very well, and then they're just articulated like that because no care and attention has been made to make sure that this is going down, and then it just throws the whole bite out, and then all the teeth end up in the wrong position. So I'm going to show you how I adjust that bite block in a minute to go down on a model like this perfectly. So first of all, I'm going to cut this middle bit out as you can see, I'm just whacking those bits because sometimes that's a quicker way of getting it out and creating fracture or stress lines with the knife, and then tapping it so that it chips out. We just need to remove enough that we can get our finger in and put the wax down when we come to do the wax part of it. And when we're scratching around with a knife, we're being very careful that we don't scratch any of the fitting surface where we're making the denture. The purpose of this video really is to show you guys what goes on in the laboratory. Obviously all the CDTs that are watching this channel already know how to do this, and I'm sure dentists will have an idea, but there might be some members of the dental team, like dental nurses, who don't really know what goes on in the lab, and it's really good to have an idea of what it is when you send your impressions off what we're doing behind the scenes to create these wonderful dentures that we make. So there we go, that's that prepped and ready for the bite block to be situated on there so we can articulate it. Right, so I usually use a scalpel for this. What I'm looking at doing is I just want the wax crest of the ridge left to marry up with that crest of ridge, because if you leave the flanges on your bite block when you're articulating, it will hold off in areas. So it might look like here it's fitting really well and here really well, but actually it might not be under there because it's hidden by the flange. So if we remove these flanges, notice how I'm cutting as well. I'm cutting towards me, but there's never any risk of me cutting myself because I'm controlling it the way that I'm doing it. If I slip, my thumb's coming as well. My thumb's actually stopping me from cutting myself of where it is. So don't be shouting in the comments, cut away from you, because you've got no control if you're trying to cut that way. But here you've got control. You've got this control here where you can cut what you want without risking cutting yourself. So as you can see, I'm just trimming off. Now I normally do this at a bench, but I'm not for some reason. I'm stood here doing it. So I'm just whittling this registration block right down. So now when we put it on the model, there's no interference, and we can see that it's going right down onto the ridge, which is the most important part, because this, again, this is mucostatic. So this tissue doesn't move. This tissue moves. If we took the impression the cheeks pulled up a little bit and then we've got the wax on there, it's not going to be accurate, and it's the bit that changes. So even though this wasn't made on this model, once we trim it right back, you can see it fits against that ridge perfectly. Which means if this is perfect on here, this is the bit that goes wrong when people are articulating. They don't get it on this bit. Sometimes there might be something holding it off. In that case, just remove the wax, or if it's just a little bit, let's just say you got like a little bubble there, and so there's a little raised bit of plaster, you put it in, that's the only bit holding it off. You just push it and the wax will displace, and then the wax will sit down against the rest of the model nice and flush, and you're not then articulating it where it's all sort of skew with. And it's the same with this bit now. When we put this on, it should go pretty close. If it's not, and you just squeeze it a little bit, because it's wax, it will have a little bit of give. But there, we know now if we articulate like that, that's going to be bang on, and we're going to get a really good bite registration. Right, so now we just need to make sure that we seal this down onto the model properly and that it's not going to move whilst we're doing the try-in. The models are damp, but they're not soaking wet. So if you've wetted them, just dry them. If they're bone dry, make sure you just damp them a little bit, because if they're too dry, when you melt the wax, it will soak in to the plaster and then you'll never get it off. So what I usually like to do is just melt the existing wax onto the model, but I'm getting this wax knife really hot, so it's smoking, so that as it melts the wax, it's flowing into all the detail of the model, which is what's going to lock it in position. But what you've got to be careful is that as you're doing this, it doesn't move and that the wax isn't flowing underneath. Also that you're not melting any of the where the teeth are. Because if you get any drips on there, then the opposing model isn't going to go on properly. So I'm just melting and I'm controlling where the wax is flowing by the angle that I'm holding the model, flowing it all the way around. And then if we want to add some extra retention, we can just get a little slice, heat that up, and just flood it in. Then we put this on and we do the same again. Careful where the wax is dripping. Okay, again just melting it in. We let this wax cool down. What we want to do, once it has cooled down, we just need to check and make sure that it's not pulled away from the model, because as the wax cools down it shrinks and sometimes it pulls away and then the whole thing will come apart, and you don't want it coming apart when you're trying to articulate. So there we go. In the next video I'll be showing you how I articulate. There's many different ways of articulating, lots of different methods. I'm just going to do a very basic method, although I am doing it on a semi-adjustable articulator. Hope you found this interesting and useful, and we'll see you in the next one.